So I've been with Azure AD since before it was called Azure AD. So what makes up hybrid identity? So before we begin sort of diving in deep, I just wanted to give you an overview of which sections we're going to actually talk about as we think about hybrid identity. Okay. So the first thing is AAD Connect, and this is kind of in some semblance of a logical order. AAD Connect is our tool that allows us to get data, in this case user profile data, as well as group data, if you will, about users up into the cloud, as well as figuring out how to get the identity from on-prem into the cloud. All right. In this case, you can either use password hash sync, which we'll talk about a bit more, or ADFS for a single sign-on experience. Okay, and that's that line in the middle. The next thing we're going to talk about after that is the application proxy. Okay, the application proxy, for those who don't know, we'll dig into this more, but it's really a remote access as a service. All right, how I can get people to access my on-prem apps in this model. Here, how can I get to my on-prem apps when the user is effectively remote? And we'll click it. There we go. Click it. Needed another click. Then we'll talk about AAD Health or AAD Connect Health. All right. How do we monitor and make sure that everything's running in this hybrid environment, right? And really, here we're talking about monitoring the key critical elements of that. Being ADFS, the sync engine. To start with, we'll add more things to that as we go through. And then finally, we'll talk about, in the hybrid sense of the word, how do I take my on-prem apps, my legacy on-prem apps running on legacy hardware, if you will, or pieces of hardware, how do I lift and shift those into the cloud? How can I get added value from being able to take on-prem stuff, shove it in the cloud in a simple way, and still provide access to it for all of my end users? Okay, so those are the bits we're going to talk about. If there's something missing in here, or if you want to know more, we can try and cover it through. So firstly, AAD Connect. Who's familiar with AAD Connect? As many hands as that. Excellent. So we all know what it does. And if you've been here long enough, you know we used to have a tool called drsync, and then we had another tool called AAD Sync, and then we had the FIM and AD connector. Basically what we've done is wrapped all that up, and we now call it AAD Connect. All right. It's essentially the same type of engine that was there before, but the bundling and the packaging is much better. All right. Where ADFS was separate, it's now integrated into the experience, as is Health. So when you deploy AAD Connect, and you install the sync engine, or if you install ADFS through AAD Connect, we deploy a Health agent with it. Okay. The Health agent sits there and collects logs and does things. You might be interested to know that probably 90% of people use express settings. So this is synchronizing information up into the cloud and using password hash sync as the means of pulling that data across. This is really where we're investing. There's been a plan to deprecate the older versions. All right, you may have seen some announcements recently around deprecating older versions of drsync and AAD sync. There's a bunch of upgrade paths. All right. Andreas has done a really good job of documenting these on the link at the bottom here. But basically, if you're running drsync, right, the older versions of drsync, we've removed some of the object limits. So if drsync used to be less than 50,000 objects, you would be okay with the SQL instance, SQL Express instance. Over that, we suggested SQL Server. All right, some of that has changed, so it's worthwhile looking at. If you're right on the sort of border there and you're unsure, it'd be worthwhile re-looking at how many objects you actually need. drsync in-place upgrade. We pull lots of the customizations you did in drsync, which are kind of manual, are now available in AAD Connect. There are some unsupported things that people did in drsync, such as turning off particular attribute flows. If you did that in drsync, a side-by-side deployment is probably your right answer, and we have that capability in AAD Connect to be able to say, I only want to synchronize certain pieces of my environment. I don't want all attributes to come up. If you've got more than 50,000, there's a side-by-side option. Effectively, you're deploying a secondary server. You're putting that server into staging mode. There's an export-import process. It's a little bit funky. You've got to close the wizard, run the export, run the import. Once you do that, you'll get to a point where you have staging, so there need not be any delay in the process here, except for the time where we turn off the old engine, turn on the new. All right. If you've got AAD sync, you're in a pretty good spot. You should just upgrade in place. Okay. So I said, good article at the bottom there to roll through. So what have we, recently we've made changes since the 1.1 release of AAD Connect that came out, I want to say January, late January, can't remember now, might have been early February. Anyway, what we've done in that is we now support sort of keeping it up to date. You can think here like Windows Update. Excuse me. Predominantly, it was it's for express settings. So we started with the sort of simple model. Covers probably 80 to 90% of the population that run AAD Connect. When you synchronize the objects up, we'll keep updating the version of AAD Connect. There's a site that maintains what changes are happening inside AAD Connect. Excuse me. But it'll update itself as you go through. Okay. We're going to look at expanding that over time. This is why, oh, thank you. Perfect. This is why it's really important to keep up to date. Try and stay on the standard configuration. That way you'll be able to take advantage of the auto update as we build it into the solution. All right. How many people are running AAD Connect, have upgraded to AAD Connect? Oh, okay. How many people are on legacy versions, non-AAD Connect? Couple. Okay. It's not as painful as I make it seem here. It is reasonably straightforward. And you get some added benefits. One is you can now set the sync time frame down as low as 30 minutes. It's not a scheduled task. All right. So those who were used to manipulating or go looking for the scheduled task, it doesn't exist anymore. All right, but you can set it down. It's not a scheduled task. It does run. You can still kick off syncs manually if you need to. All done through PowerShell now. So the list of PowerShell commandlets is grown quite a bit since it was, but this is probably the key enhancement here. Excuse me. Yeah, go for it.
So you can execute management agents via PowerShell manually?
You can start a Delta sync or a full, oh, sorry, it's a big banner at the back saying repeat the question. Can you manually start the agents, the connector agents to export or import via PowerShell? And the answer is you can't control the individual agents, but you can kick off a sync cycle, right? So you can kick off a Delta sync or an initial sync, a full sync effectively, okay? So it's not the individual agents because we'll have an agent, a target agent for the cloud and however many target agents there are for on-prem, we'll run them through the entire sequence. If you want to start an individual one, you can run it from the console, right? You right-click, run agent. Okay. Sorry.
So is that done deal? It's no option whatsoever?
There isn't an option today. It'd be interesting to understand the scenario where you would want to run an individual sync agent.
Pending the leak limit, so you don't want to sync through more than, say, 100 or 10% of the leaks out of your Active Directory because somebody screwed up. So
Correct.
If you're running custom run management, you might want to check for pending deletes, pending changes, some state of that connector before you go ahead and sync it through or run it.
Before you do the export?
Yeah.
All right. So just repeating what I'm, for the record, which I think is a good example. So we have something which I'm not going to talk about called we have a delete protection within the cloud. Okay, so if you try and export too many deletes, we stop the sync cycle altogether. The question here is, I think the statement is, if I can run an agent independently, I can kick off an import from each of the management agents that talk to on-prem. I can look at how many changes are pending within that and be able to control that more granularly for my own experiences. It's good feedback. It's not something that I think we have in plan, but I can certainly see where there's something coming through.
Currently, the WMI, the scripting still works. It's still run an individual run profile.
You could through WMI, correct. So can you use WMI to do it? Sure. Yeah, but it ain't PowerShell, right?
So Ross, the real feedback is if you're going to turn off WMI,
That's the question.
That's the question.
Make sure you put that stuff back into PowerShell. That's the feedback.
Right, so if we're going to deprecate the WMI interface to be able to do things, then let's make sure we have it in PowerShell.
Please.
Makes sense. And to be honest, there is a big movement right now to try and drive more cloud intelligence. All right, to really drive this more from the cloud than from an on-prem component. So that's good feedback to understand how you guys use the system, so we'll make sure we don't decorate too many of those capabilities. All right. Some things that we can do. We used to be able to do OU filtering. We now allow you to filter out domains. Before, if a domain was unreachable, it was the end of your sync. You can now filter that out, and you can select different OUs from different domains. Right, so this gives you a more flexible view of filtering out the data that comes through. Okay. This is probably the major benefit that we've added. It really comes into the cloud, and this is about trying to solve those problems with on-prem where people have duplicate UPNs or duplicate proxy addresses, or worse still, a UPN that's a proxy address of somebody else. Right, this. I'm not sure if you'll understand, but if you come in with one particular UPN, we will attempt to add it as a proxy address on the user. By trying to add it, it fails. Pardon? Can we stop doing that? Yeah. For prosperity. Yeah, so all right, for the recording. The question is, can we stop taking the user's UPN and adding it to their list of proxy addresses? We should talk about this offline. It's a historical piece of code that lives that does this. It was based around the way that Exchange operates. All right, I can take the feedback back, but it is effectively we do it because Exchange told us to. Yeah, I may be with you on this, but yeah.
You are.
Yeah, I am. So I agree. But we've had it in there for a very long period of time. I will certainly take it back and talk to the Exchange team and see whether there's options to disable that right through. There are reasons they do it. They have authentication, and the way that it works in the cloud for Exchange for lookup is very different. It's not as straightforward as one would think. So there is some requirement that the UPN exist inside the proxy addresses so they can find the account. But we can take them back the feedback. I've heard the feedback. Yeah. All right. So what we're doing now, though, to help with this is we have a new sort of quarantine behavior. All right. Effectively, what we're trying to do here is when objects come in, the first one wins. So there's no way of knowing which object will win, but generally, generally, the first one will win, the second one will fail. There's no way to tell alphabetically or any other scientific way of knowing which one will choose, but one of them will fail. What that means, though, is one of the objects comes in, and instead of completely dropping the other object on the floor, it will come through. All right. In the case of UPN, we do certain things, which I'll cover in a second. For proxy addresses, we drop them on the floor. We just don't pull them through. But we do keep track of this. It helps with a lot of the onboarding where you've got sort of dirty data on-prem and you're trying to get it into the cloud. It does make a big difference. There's two ways of administering this. There's a PowerShell through the MSOL commandlets, the Azure AD PowerShell, not the Azure PowerShell, not to be confused. And then there's a report within the Office 365 admin portal where you can see the list of objects with errors, I believe they call it. Okay. So as I said, first object wins, and they can be across a bunch of different objects, users, groups, contacts, and public folders. Any of these objects could create collisions on proxy addresses, predominantly proxy addresses in this case. When a UPN gets quarantined, we basically randomize it. We take the original UPN, we add some 4 characters to it, make it unique, and stick it on the onmicrosoft.com domain. duplicate proxies, as I said, are dropped. We have a new attribute that we effectively in the directory where we store all of this data. The dsync provisioning errors, and the commandlet is called something similar to get MSOL dsync provisioning errors. What we do is we store that on both objects. So we know this object collided with this object, and we know which property it collided on. Okay, so you can do things like find out where I had proxy address collisions or UPN collisions, those types of things, and which object I collided with. As you remediate the problem, there's a background job that runs every hour that attempts to resolve the conflict. All right, so there's some nuances in this right now that we're working through, but effectively, if you fix an object, so you go into on-prem and you reset the UPN, you fix up the UPNs, the cloud will automatically try and fix it. Right, so there's nothing you need to do in the cloud per se, but it gives you a way of being able to sort of look at a stream of emails that tell you every sync cycle, this guy failed, oh, would you believe it, he failed again. You can look at it as a set and deal with the set rather than look at 50 emails and then another 50 emails 3 hours later or 30 minutes later, and then another 50 and another 50. You can look at the 50 objects that are causing you grief and fix them one by one. It's a much simpler process, and also it means that you've not got people who are literally dead in the water, all right, where they come in, they wouldn't come in because they're missing a proxy, you just want them to get to SharePoint. They no longer fail completely. They will get into the system. So this is a big step forward for us. All right. Just one last point I didn't mention here. Source of authority is really important. If the object came from on-prem, they can conflict with cloud-based objects. If the object came from on-prem, we need to fix it where it was busted. So in this case, if it's a desynced object marked that way, it needs to be fixed on-prem. Is there documentation for this somewhere? There is documentation for this somewhere. I will tell you where that document. So a lot of this is documented within the Azure under the Azure in the Azure management documentation. If you search for something like dsync provisioning error, that's a pretty key word. You should find quite a bit of documentation about how it works, how you turn it on, right? It's not on for everybody, all right? It's something that you need to enable. And the reason we do that is, part of it is, and I think this is on this slide, no? The reason we don't turn it on for everybody is because people are used to a certain behavior. You turn something on, they get a different behavior. What's going on? I like my behavior I had before. So it is an opt-in, opt-out. So if you search through this, you can find out how to enable it. It will become the norm for a lot of people for new instances of dsync, right? If you're an existing customer, it is an enable process, okay? Okay, so some additional things that we did in here, just pretty straightforward. We added modern auth to the setup of dsync. So when you actually set up AAD Connect, I just called it dsync, didn't I? When you set up AAD Connect, you didn't hear that. When you set up AAD Connect, you can now use an MFA-based admin to actually set it up. Previously, we used a library that didn't support MFA. We now have that. It still creates an account in the cloud that's used for sync that can't be MFA'd, but at least at the set point in time of creation of that account and creation of the, the management agents, etc., you can log in with an MFA-based admin account to set it up. All right. We added support for authenticated proxies if you have them. How many people use a proxy on the way out of their environment for sync? One. All right. That's good. That's good. We also built some more functionality around changing your sign-in method. So if you go into AAD Connect and you're running ADFS and you say, I want to go to password sync, that's now fully orchestrated from the tool. All right. It will convert the users. We'll kick off a full password sync cycle, do the dance for you, make sure everything's working. It does take a couple of hours. There is a changeover period of about 2 hours here. So don't necessarily kill off your ADFS server too quickly. Let it run for a little while. You can also do it for temporary reasons. Say, for example, you're running ADFS with password sync as backup. You can go in and say, I want to go from ADFS to password sync. I want to do it temporarily. If you do it temporarily, we don't convert the users. There's a reason we don't do that. It runs faster without doing that. It still has a couple of hours, about 2 hour changeover period, but It means that you stay in a more consistent state. So when you flip back to ADFS, there's nothing necessary to do there. It's a sort of temporary state, if you will. So it supports both modes of short-term turnover, I'm going to go back to federation, and long-term turnover, I want to go from federation through to password sync, hash sync. Okay. And there's a new sort of fix my trust. All right, my trust is broken. Somebody did something somewhere. I can now hit a button and fix it up. Okay. So moving on. Any questions about sync? Nope. Shoot.
Just the one question, and it's brand new, so maybe we don't have the data on it, but device registration, Windows 10, syncing the half-hour wait when I give a user a new machine and initial access because they have one.
They have not yet joined the domain. So this is, the question is, when I sync today and I have a Windows 10 device and I want to domain join it plus join it to Azure AD, there is a complicated dance that happens between AD, sync, the cloud, and the machine. And that process is governed by however fast my sync interval is. The issue being that I want people to be AAD joined to be able to access certain applications, and they won't satisfy that request until they log in, or until this 30-minute period goes by and the dance occurs. It's a shame Venkatesh isn't in the room. It's something that we are looking at trying to fix. All right. There are ways of speeding it up. If you have ADFS in the environment, you can get a token from ADFS, send it direct up, and you'll get a much faster experience. There is work, though, going on to make it seamless so that as the device boots, the device will be able to do both jobs at the same time, i.e. it'll be able to say, I'm domain joined, there's a policy says that I should connect to the cloud, I will do that now and it will succeed, right? It sort of comes back to here where we're talking about, no, it's not on that, it was on my other slide, sorry, where we're really trying to improve the way that we do the integration between on-prem and the cloud, with the cloud driving more of that functionality than necessarily deploying things on-prem. Okay.
Thank you. So, any chance we're going to get an Azure AD management agent for MIM?
An Azure AD management agent for MIM.
Meaning we like .NET better than Flat.
I would have to double check. I don't believe that you will get one. The push is AAD Connect, and the bigger push is to get AAD Connect to become cloud focused as opposed to on-prem focused. But we should talk offline on the scenarios.
For someone that was using the DirSync era, I don't know what the term is, the MSO management agent for PIM 2010. If you install Azure AD Connect, when it connects to the cloud, does it make changes that will break the old one? Or are they just going to fight over what attributes should be based on their differing rules?
Oh, I see. So are you asking if I have DirSync running today?
Well, not DirSync,
no.
But that management agent. That
Oh, okay. I have a custom thing running where I've got the management agent and it's pushing attributes up to the cloud. And then I install AAD Connect and I try and push things to the cloud. The question is, will they fight? They will complain bitterly at each other, all right? Nobody, from the cloud's perspective, you're going to get everything pulled back down and they're going to try and keep everything in sync, right? So if I think his title should be, program manager and you think the title should be, I don't know, sales assistant, you'll just constantly be writing over the top. Directory change not imported, all these sorts of things will come through. You should only run one sync into the cloud. Each tenant should only really have one pipe into it. All right? If it has many, it causes problems.
My thought was along the lines of the install procedure and all that plan.
Yeah, so the install...
Will it break or will it...
So what we generally do, so the question here is, what's the install procedure so I don't bust? What we would normally do in that situation is recommend side-by-side with staging on the new guy. So you can then confirm what's in the metaverse. You can look and search the metaverse, see what would be going on, how things would be projected into the cloud. You're effectively pulling from the cloud, pulling from on-prem. You'll get the join up but there'll be no outbound provisioning. There's no export going on, right? But you can then confirm that you've got the right data, the right attribute sets, the way you want it to work. Turn off the old server, shut it down. Turn on the new server, right? Come out of staging mode, go into provisioning mode. Start provisioning through. If all else fails, you can always turn it off, go back to the old. But you should be able to, the goal is that in that side-by-side configuration, the staging mode gives you the ability to see what is happening in the environment. Am I doing the right things? Have I got the right attributes? Am I missing things?
Okay, so it really is about writing the attributes. They're not using different APIs in the back end.
No, they're not using different APIs in the back end. They're all talking to the same endpoint. There is no change.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Azure AD application proxy, hands up. Anybody know what I'm talking about here? Couple? Oh, quite a few. Excellent. So remote access as a service extends effectively AD control plane back to your on-prem apps. All right, gives you that ability to publish applications from on-prem to the cloud using the remote access portion, if you will, as a service, and then can take that on the Azure AD control plane and be able to drive that value back down to on-prem for things like KCD and SSO. Okay, so how does it work? You deploy connectors on-prem. The connectors effectively perform an outbound connection. So there's actually a number of outbound connections. If you look at the set of ports that we use for App Proxy, it's quite extensive. What we're actually doing here is two things. We have a long-term outbound connection that sits there from the connector that allows you to listen for events. Okay, so it's listening to say, is there something for me to do? When a connection comes in and the client says, all right, I've got something and I want to now push that, get that request done, it actually forms another channel out. It's all using SSL. It's all certificate-based auth. All right, so the connector is the only thing that talks to the App Proxy service, and the App Proxy service only talks to the connector. All right, there's no clients talking to connectors or any of these types of things. Of course, you deploy multiple connectors for redundancy. Generally speaking, the connector is pretty scalable, 1,000 requests per second on a reasonably sized box. Okay, 4 gig, 4 proc 8 gig type setup, and you'll get 1,000 requests per second through it. Right, it's really just passing bits backwards and forwards, minor modifications that the connector makes. Okay. Effectively, the user accesses that URL. It goes up to us first. We figure out if the user needs to authenticate, what they need to do. All going according to plan. We ship it back to on-prem through that connector channel. The connector takes the request to the server and then routes it back up to us.
So any plans to allow third parties to build their own connector to plug into this platform?
Any plans for allowing third parties to plug into this, to build their own connector to plug into this platform? Not today. If you've got particular scenarios, I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, I mean, everybody already has connectors called, edge devices, reverse proxies.
Correct.
New connectors to do the same thing.
Correct. So people have lots of connectors today. We'd like to think that they can replace all of them with this.
Sure.
Any plans for any help on this? I've had mine disconnect before.
Yeah. So it's a good question. Are there any plans to add health monitoring to this? And definitely. You can see the fellow in front of you. He's shaking his head because he owns this. But definitely, yes, we had a little problem last week. So yes, definitely trying to get this through. Okay. And of course, you can bring your own domain. You need to give us a cert, and we roll through from there. So connector groups. You may have very different environments. You might have an environment that lives on-prem. You might have an environment that lives in Azure or some other cloud services. We have this ability to be able to form connector groups. They're good if you have multiple forests. You have applications in different forests. KCD across forests is always a little interesting. So you can deploy connectors in groups. Okay, they work the same way. You affinitize an application to a group. Okay, a group of connectors allows you to sort of cross those boundaries. All right. Otherwise, it works the same way. 2 modes of authentication that come through here. You've got pass-through authentication, which is effectively no authentication, It's really good for dealing with sort of NDES, CRLs, publishing sort of non-authenticated content. You can also do pre-authentication. You don't have to, if you do pre-authentication, you can then take that authentication from the cloud and apply it to a back end. So you can do KCD for SSO, if you will, to integrated Windows apps. If you don't do pre-authentication, you can't obviously do SSO on the back end. Okay.
Can you do KCD to a generic account on-prem?
You can do KCD or Kerberos constraint delegation or SPNego to an account that exists on-prem. The only
Yep.
Can I map an individual to a generic? The way that we map today is we give you some rules that you can map, right? So we take UPN, SAM account name, these types of things. Mapping it to a generic isn't possible today. What would be the scenario where you want to map to a generic account as opposed to a specific account?
If I had a group in the cloud called student, then any student could map to a single user on-prem called student, and then you wouldn't necessarily have to have a one-to-one mapping between your cloud identity and your on-prem identity.
Okay, so the question here, or the statement is, I've got a bunch of students, I live in a group called students, I've got an app on-prem, doesn't have any particular per user settings, I just want students who are a member of students to be able to get to on-prem and just call them students when they get here, right? KCD to students. We should talk a little bit more offline. We are working on ways where if the user can authenticate in the cloud, they can authenticate to AD, right? And they need not have a footprint in AD. We can talk more about that afterwards. Okay. SSO from the cloud. KCD. Who's familiar with Kerberos constrained delegation? All right. Who's read the book on Kerberos? Nothing kills me more than Kerberos constrained delegation. But effectively what we do is we take an AAD token, we pass that token through a proxy, that proxy connector converts it to a Kerberos ticket and sends it to the back-end application. I'm not going to go through a whole bunch of this. It requires a bunch of different types of technology. It's a complicated piece of infrastructure, and we have limited amount of time. So there is effectively, just from here, take this away. One good thing you can do here with Kerberos constrained delegation is I have a phone. It has no idea how to do Kerberos constrained delegation. No idea how to do Kerberos logon, but it knows how to log into AAD because it can fire off a browser. I can get single sign-on to on-prem apps through this because effectively I've moved the authentication up into Azure AD where I'm all nice and web-based and friendly on mobile devices. And I could show you, if we have time, I'll show you how that looks. All right. Quickly through the last parts of this. We operate obviously at cloud scale. We provide a bunch of filtering. We terminate traffic at our end, okay, up at the app proxy service. It allows us to make sure that if you're doing pre-authentication, no unauthenticated traffic hits your on-prem environment. We're obviously run through the same sort of, administered through the Azure process, very much like the trust process, you know, the Azure Trust Center, for the way that we deal with secrets and management and all those sorts of things. It's all outbound connections from on-prem. We do support proxies in front of that. We do all of the AAD logging that comes through, so all of the control plane you get from Azure AD login can be applied to your on-prem apps.
So with ExpressRoute, that would be traffic over the public realm?
Correct. If you're using ExpressRoute, then this would be traffic over the public portion, of the public peering of ExpressRoute. That is correct. Okay. I will say we do, the only thing that we filter out today, we do filter out robots. So even if you're pre-authenticated or not pre-authenticated, you're sort of publishing an endpoint with pass-through, we will filter out robots. So robots, you know, the Google robot and the Bing robot won't come and index your sites. All right, so we do some level of filtering, but not very much. Okay, what do we publish? Browser-based applications, love them, particularly when they've got Windows integrated auth at the back end. Pre-auth, KCD, SSO, all good. You can combine a couple of things together. So if you have forms-based applications on premises, if you're familiar with the way that we handle SaaS with SaaS apps with password vaulting, you can combine these two things together. You have to create two apps today. If you combine these two things together, you can get to the point where you can publish your on-prem app with a forms-based login, have the user's password vaulted, and still get access. Okay. We do support rich clients. We have a couple of clients who have on-prem APIs, web APIs, who use integrated auth and have no idea how to talk to the internet. They're building mobile applications that use ADL to get a token that they pass to app proxy. We do the KCD dance and they get what they need. If you're interested, I can give you an example of what's possible there. And then we're looking at and working closely with, today we have the ability to publish remote desktop. So RDP clients, you can publish that out. We're looking at improving a couple of areas there, predominantly around protecting all the way through, making sure you can do something like MFA beforehand, as well as SSO, getting single sign-on all the way through. It's going to take some changes from the remote desktop team, but they're actively working with us on it. So we'll hopefully have some good news in this area to be able to support all of your applications, the ones that are not web, effectively via the sort of publishing of that app.
Are you working with Citrix on remote app for on-prem stuff?
I'm not working directly with Citrix. I'm working with customers who use Citrix to try and be able to provide a similar type of service. It's a little trickier. Yeah, publishing a desktop or publishing an app makes little difference. It's actually getting the right protocols, or making sure that Citrix provides us with the right protocols to go through. For example, remote desktop services, when you publish to RDP, it uses RPC over HTTPS. We like it. We know how to publish it. We've got a rule for it. It's all good. Citrix is a bit different. Right? I think it's WebSockets, which we don't support today. So we may not be able to get Citrix done, but we are working with customers who have Citrix. Okay. I was going to do a demo, and given where we are, I'm going to skip the demo. But if we have time, I'll come back for it. I was just going to show you how SharePoint works. All right, how you can get integrated auth experience.
Does it provide you any controls to throttle the connection? Like, say I know that performance is going to crater when I get 10,000 connections. So I just want to stop instead of having it fail. I just want to send a message to people saying, I'm too busy, go away.
Yeah, it's their ability within App Proxy to throttle connections so that you can, at some limit, kill them off and move forward from there. Not today. It's interesting based around some of the other things we're thinking around how load balancing works, right? How can we help people effectively load balance an application without putting a load balancer in front of it, using App Proxy as the means of doing that, or the connectors being more aware of what they're doing. Right? Not something we do today, though. Okay. All right, let's keep going. So Azure AD Connect Health. All right, how many people have used Azure AD Connect Health? Okay. Did you count? Yeah. So you get this with, it's a premium service, as is App Proxy. How many people are familiar with AAD and its pricing models? As few as those. How many people have heard of the basic premium offerings that we have within AAD? Okay, perfect. So this is one of the premium offerings. Okay, if you're interested, we can talk a little bit more offline. But there's effectively a set of services that you get with premium. App Proxy is part of the basic set. This one's part of the premium set. Effectively, what we do here, when you deploy AAD Connect, we deploy the health agent. And the health agent is effectively sending events up through an Azure service, Event Hub, I believe, up into the cloud. And what we do from there is, since we built the sync engine and we built ADFS, we have a pretty good idea of what to look at in the event logs, performance logs, to give you pretty low noise alerting. Okay, and you can configure that for email. You can say, I want email alerts, I don't want email alerts, how frequently you want those to come through. And we provide a bunch of insights, right? How many logins are going through ADFS, what the sync latency objects look like, lots of alerting. And there's an RBAC model for delegating who can do what within it, okay? As it says, it requires the premium license. So how does it actually work? So as I said, when we go through and deploy deploy AAD Connect, and we deploy the sync engine, or we deploy ADFS, including the proxy. So in here it says the web application proxy, which is effectively the newer version of the ADFS proxy, if you will. And we deploy the health agents with them. What they're basically doing is collecting data from those servers and sending it up into the cloud. What we do then is we crunch it around, we look at the way that it handles data, and then we take that and produce reports and bunch of alerts.
Are those signals documented if you wanted to take some of those same signals from your non-ADFS IDP and surface them in the same space?
So let me see if I get the question. Can I, let's say I don't have ADFS, and I want to be able to do a similar type of reporting capability. Is there a plug-in model where I can plug into that model so it pushes data up into the cloud? He's shaking his head violently at the back of the room. The answer is no, not today. All right. It's really built around trying to look at the hybrid offering that we have. All right. So are there any plans to open it up?
No, but I would like to understand what
Yeah.
where you're coming from, what on-prem product that is interesting in you.
Yeah.
Let's have a chat.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll take that one offline and have a bit more of a conversation there. So admin portal is the way you get there. It's outbound communications again. Okay. There's no inbound connectivity required here. All right. We really are trying to get to a model where you don't need to go and build a DMZ to be able to actually operate your environment. Okay. So what can you monitor? I've given a snapshot of it here. If you actually go into the AD Health tool, it's a great way of being able to see what's available, get those reports. If you're not premium today, you can download a trial. If you've been running AD Connect and ADFS for a while, the events have been sent up and will come up in the report once you effectively you're enabling your visibility to the report. Yeah. So grab a 30-day trial. It's free. You'll be able to then see what sort of value you get out of this. From an ADFS perspective, we have a bunch of token issuance rules. Token issuance setups. How many come through? How many are rejected? What sort of latency we're looking at. You can get some pretty good reporting on what's going on there. Obviously, performance data is coming through as well, CPU, memory, these types of things, and usage. Probably the most important thing here is usage, right? Being able to look at success and failed requests and the top 50 users and how many times they've logged in and how many times they failed. So you can find those devices that are effectively locking out user accounts or doing something like that. Several thousand logins coming from a particular IP and the user doesn't know why they can't log in. This report will be able to get you into there. So it's a pretty good way of looking at what's going on. If you're using AAD Connect, really, here what we're trying to show you is how long is it taking, right? How long does it take to do an import from your on-prem? How long are you spending doing exports? What churn rates are there? Object deletes, object updates, right? Object adds. You can get an idea over a period of time what that looks like. All right. So if you haven't used AAD Health, grab a trial. You've got data. It's already there. It's just a matter of turning on the view for it. All right. AAD Domain Services. So a lot of people have legacy apps sitting around. Oh, sorry, question.
I'm sorry, just before you move on from that, I want to say I really like that product. It showed a QFE that was missing from one of my servers that didn't get picked up by automatic update. Very cool.
Excellent. So a statement there around QFE monitoring, I gloss over. We do look at what's on the server, what patches are applied, making sure you're up to date, even when Windows Update doesn't quite get you all the way there, obvious in this case. So the fellow in front of you deserves a congratulations. So AAD Domain Services. Quick show of hands, anybody? Couple. Perfect. If you're in my last session, then you've heard about it. So AAD Domain Services is effectively gives you the ability to stand up a DC in the cloud, if you will. Now, I gloss over it, right? So effectively what it allows us to do is, from a traditional perspective, I would have sat down, I would have said, I want to take some applications and move them to the cloud are going to, help me reduce my cost of ownership. I'll be able to expand it for when I need to for the, the July reporting period, and then shrink it back down for when they're not using it. But in order for me to do that, my application needs a DC. Right? It needs domain services. That's as simple as that. It talks LDAP, it does LDAP binds, it does ADSI, whatever it does, all of these non-friendly protocols, if you will. But, and the traditional way of doing that was very expensive, right? Well, not very expensive, but was expensive. I had to connect on-prem to the cloud somehow, ExpressRoute, VPN, whatever it happened to be, or I put a DC up there and I had to manage that infrastructure as well as the app, all right? What we did was we said this was a problem. And we have a way of getting your data from on-prem up into the cloud. So we have AAD Connect. It gets all my data from on-prem, groups, users, etc., pushes them into AD. And with a few clicks, click a box, say I want this service. I want this VNet for you to connect to, give it a name, and you've got a set of domain services sitting in the cloud now. What it allows you to do then is on that VNet, you can have machines connect to it. They can join that domain, right? It's a reflection of Azure AD, so you can take data from Azure AD. We effectively, as user objects, accounts get created, groups get created, updated, etc., deleted, we sync that across to the DCs, right? We don't give you management capabilities of these DCs. You get some limited management capabilities of them, but they effectively sit there and they offer the domain services that these boxes need, right? These legacy applications. And you don't need to connect everything back to on-prem, right? The connection here to on-prem is AAD Connect, if you will, all right? So what you need to know. So there's like all good things, there's a few things that you should know before you roll down this. We manage this service, right? It is a managed service. It's not a set of DCs that we stand up for you and give you full access to, all right? We do allow you to administer certain things within them, okay? So you need to be a member of this group, the AAD DC Administrators Group. That group is not domain admins, but is an admin within the box, right? So we give it limited controls on what it can and can't do, all right? Right now, we only have support for the classic VNet. So if you create a new VNet, it'll be an ARM net. There is a way of joining them together. It's a little complicated, but there is an article. It's one of the feedback we get. We will fix this. We added support for customer use. So like we know that some applications, when you lift and shift into the cloud, they need to be in a particular OU. They look for objects in particular OUs. If they don't have those OU structures, it doesn't work very well for them. Probably the most important point on this slide, which is right here in the middle, is the fact that the data has a source of authority. All right? So I said we're syncing or effectively reflecting the data from AAD to DC so that you get a legacy LDAP directory services type head on top of them. All right? But the source of authority for those objects is either AAD or your on-premises environment if they sync through AAD Connect. So yes, you can go through and do things like change them, right? You can try and modify them. We'll just override that, right? And the same goes if you try and like set your password or do those sorts of things in the DC instance, it'll be overridden, okay? So keep in mind just where the data comes from. You really are pushing data back into on-prem. So this is more of a read-only type setup at this point. Because it's a new DC, you will get different SIDs. So just keep in mind if you've got an application that uses SIDs or particular, it's saying, I expect this SID, not domain, not group name, but I expect this SID to be the ACL for my particular access, for example. When we set it up, we gave them new SIDs, right? It's a new domain, it's a new set of DCs, if you will. It's got a different SID. We are looking at how we provide some history there to enable it so that the application the authorization in the application doesn't have to change. All right. Now, if you don't sync your password from on-prem up into, sorry. Yeah.
Does this only apply to the SID or also to the object GUI for my on-prem?
It's a good question. It is new as well. The AD object GUID is new. AD object GUID is a sort of system property. It's probably not something that we're going to be able to update, but I'd like to understand your scenario further if you have a minute afterwards. Okay. So the question there was about, do we get new AD object GUIDs? And the answer is yes. If you don't sync your passwords up to the cloud, then we obviously can't get a password across to the DC instances here. Effectively, when a user goes to log into AAD Domain Services, when they log in, they can use the short name, if you will, SAM account name, to log in as they would on-prem. If you don't sync that password, we can't do that. One way of fixing that is to look at using something like App Proxy to publish the application, if it's a web app, to do KCD. All right. We're looking at other options that'll make this also possible. All right. Now, right now, there's some limitations around the way we deal with UPNs. This really comes into, I have multiple forests on-prem. I'm going to take those multiple forests and I start squishing them and pushing them up into Azure AD, effectively flattening my structure, if you will, to a single directory. When we reflect that across, we run into some issues with certain things around UPN uniqueness. It's not technically UPN uniqueness, but it looks like a UPN uniqueness problem. It's something that we're fixing. It's in preview today. It'll be fixed up before we get to GA. It's one of those things we have to fix. Okay, so that brought me to the end. So I'm going to quickly do my demo here to show you what this looks like, since I have it here in front of me, and then we are open for questions. I can type my password. Okay, so I'm going to show you just sort of 2 examples of what's going on here. I have my expense app. I actually have my expense app here twice, once when I'm external and once when I'm internal. And I also have SharePoint here as well. But let's try my expense app when I'm an employee. When I click on here, it's going to roll me through, log me in. It's logging me into my tenant now. All going according to plan. My token's still good. And I'm logged into my expense app, which came from on-prem. All right. Not very exciting here. It knows who I am and it has some orders in here. All right. I'm going to go back to here, try and use my external one. Now, my external one, I have a set of credentials that I've predefined here. Okay, so this is the same app, but my app supports 2 modes of login. My expense app has forms-based authentication as well as integrated auth. So when I click on this one, oh, silly machine is the wrong machine. I do have this installed somewhere. I was going to skip it. I won't bother. It uses the plugin there to grab the username and password and roll it through. Let's see if I can get it on here fast enough. All right. So while that's rolling through, are there any other questions? Anything I didn't cover that people want to know about? Open for anything you can think of. Shoot.
When you were talking about having the Azure AD Domain Services and the application running in IaaS, if the application needed like group membership and or a service account, I'm assuming that information would have to be brought into scope for Azure AD Connect, right? For it to be sent to Azure AD and then synced over?
So the question is, in domain services, if my application uses groups and I want to be able to move my application into the cloud and be able to use those groups to be able to with the application, they would need to be in scope in the AAD path in order to be able to get up to Azure AD and move across to domain services. The answer is yes and no. Yes, if you want to use your on-premises groups, they'll need to be in the path for the sync process to come through. There's a bunch of other groups that you could create in the cloud that could augment that and pass through as well, right? So you get a mix of groups coming through. Either getting groups from on-prem, or if you can create groups and new groups in the cloud, if you like, dynamic groups, whatever you happen to use, in order to push those across into the DC as a service instance. And it's not DC as a service, sorry. Azure AD Domain Services.
One I didn't mention requires a very domain services requires a very new version of AD Connect, and users have to change the password.
Not necessarily. In the case of domain services, how we get the password up there, this really comes back to the way that we do password hash sync, right? And the reason I often call it password sync, it's not. We're not syncing the password. We're syncing a hash of the password. So in traditional ways, the way that you would grab the password from on-prem is you would install the PCIMA, the plugin that would sit there, watch the password change on a DC, you've got it in a clear text, you ship it off to wherever you need to go. The way that password hash sync works is effectively, we look like a domain controller. So we go to the domain and we say, first time, I've got no cookie, I've got no state, I want to know about all the users and their password, please. We take the hash of the password, we hash it again, and we ship it off to the cloud. All right. When it gets to the cloud, the DC as a when we synchronize it across to DC as a service, there's a particular blob that comes with us. We take that and we ship it across to DC as a service so that we can hash the password and then confirm that it's the password that matched the one from on-prem. So it's not necessary for them to change their password. You can simply sync it all up and she'll come through. But you must sync the passwords. It's the cloud users that come into an interesting part. Okay.
And the other kind of comment is, I noticed that that's a service per hour.
It is so it's a different type of service. So Azure AD Domain Services is a paid service. It's not per hour. I think it's I'm not sure whether it's charged per day, but it is a pay-as-you-go type service.
It depends on the number of options.
Correct. And right now in preview, it's a single setup. In the future, it will be based on number of objects. And that'll be really about saying, if you're a small guy, we'll give you smaller machines. If you're a big guy, you get bigger machines, right? So it'll be sort of scaled in that way. Okay.
And if I'm a really, really tiny guy, do I get a free version of that?
If you're a really, really small guy, do I get a free version of Domain Services? The answer is unfortunately no, not today. But I can't remember what the price is, but it should be reasonable. Should be reasonable. Let's see if I can do this. Here, I'm going to log in as a different user. Let's try this now. I don't think this user is set up, but that's all right. Let me see if I can log in. Okay. Oh, he's got something here. Let's see. I've already installed it. All right. So when your demo doesn't work, you go somewhere else. Let's do SharePoint. And there's a good blog. I wrote a blog about how to do SharePoint where you can pull SharePoint in, right? So this is SharePoint published throughout Proxy. You can see I'm ID demo here in my MS App Proxy. Okay. And we are 2 minutes over. So I will thank you very much for your time. Hopefully it was a helpful session. Thank you.